7 days from now, the European Union will announce an emergency energy package covering 450 million people. And the country that moved first just did something that is getting almost zero coverage in the United States. France doubled its clean energy spending to 10 billion euros per year. Banned gas boilers in new construction starting this year. Set a hard legal target of 1 million heat pump installations annually. And it did all of it without new borrowing, without broad subsidies, and without asking Washington for permission. Now here's the number that explains why this happened. The Iran war has already cost Europe more than 22 billion euros in extra fossil fuel bills. Not projected costs. Costs already paid since the conflict started 6 weeks ago. And instead of going back to the market and buying more American LNG, France decided to build the infrastructure to never need to again. This is economics now. I use data to find the patterns that mainstream coverage misses. And what is happening in European energy right now is as significant as anything I have tracked in years. Let me give you the full picture, because the numbers are moving faster than the headlines. The Iran war triggered what the International Energy Agency called the largest supply disruption in the history of the global oil market. The strikes on Gulf facilities are expected to have a multi-year impact on global gas supply. Brent crude surged from around $72 to $73 per barrel before the conflict to nearly $120 at the peak. Even after a temporary ceasefire, prices were still trading around $93 per barrel this week. Europe was already in a fragile position before any of this. Gas storage was sitting at only 30% capacity after a brutal winter. Dutch TTF natural gas benchmarks nearly doubled to over 60 euros per megawatt-hour by mid-March. The European Central Bank postponed its planned rate cuts on March 19th, raised its 2026 inflation forecast, and cut GDP growth projections. Economists warned that energy-intensive economies face a real risk of technical recession if the maritime disruption persists through the summer refill season. That is the backdrop. And France did not respond with temporary fuel subsidies. France responded with a 10 billion euro per year permanent structural plan to replace imported molecules with domestic electricity. Let me show you exactly what that means. On April 10, 2026, Prime Minister Sébastien Lecornu announced France's national electrification plan. Annual state support for electrification rises from 5.5 billion euros today to 10 billion euros per year by 2030. Almost double. Funded through reallocating existing spending and cutting the government's own energy use. No new borrowing. No new deficit. Here is the specific architecture. Starting at the end of 2026, installing a gas boiler in any new construction in France becomes illegal. Not discouraged. Not taxed. Illegal. New buildings get heat pumps. New buildings get electric systems. The gas option disappears from new construction law entirely. For existing buildings, the target is 1 million heat pump installations per year by 2030. 1 million. Per year. Explicitly prioritizing French-manufactured units. That is not just an energy policy. That is a domestic industrial policy forcing supply chains to be built inside France. For social housing, 2 million units must phase out gas systems by 2050. This is working-class infrastructure transformation backed by statute. For workers who depend on personal vehicles, 50,000 electric car subsidies targeting high-mileage drivers specifically. The people for whom fuel costs are not a lifestyle choice but a fixed cost of employment. For businesses, up to 100,000 euros per electric truck or commercial van. That is 6 figures per vehicle as a direct incentive to electrify commercial freight. EDF, the state utility running France's nuclear fleet, committed an additional 240 million euros of its own capital to support the rollout. Now here is what makes this structurally different from the 2022 approach. In 2022, when energy prices surged after the Ukraine conflict, France threw tens of billions at broad consumer subsidies. The country ended the year with the largest budget deficit in the entire Eurozone. Political instability followed. Fiscal recovery was set back by years. Lecornu drew the line explicitly. He said this means refusing measures that are too generous, too costly, that create windfall effects without resolving fundamental problems. This is the deliberate rejection of the 2022 playbook. Not temporary relief. Permanent structural change. The difference between patching a leak and replacing the pipe. Now watch what happens when you compare France's response to Germany's response this week. Because the contrast is the clearest data point in this entire story. On April 13th, Germany approved a €1.6 billion fuel relief package. That comes to $1.9 billion US. The measures cut gasoline and diesel taxes by 17 cents per liter for 2 months. There is also a €1,000 tax-free employer contribution available for workers. Markus Söder, leader of Germany's Christian Social Union, put it bluntly. He said the Iran war is not our war, but it is our problem. That quote is important, because what it reveals is the exact strategic trap France is trying to escape. When an external conflict raises your energy costs by billions of euros, the only response available to a fossil fuel-dependent economy is to subsidize the cost. You are paying twice. Once for the fuel itself and once to politically manage the pain of the price. Germany's leading economic institutes cut the country's 2026 growth forecast from 1.3% to just 0.6%, citing higher energy costs and geopolitical uncertainty. German energy inflation hit 7.2% year-on-year in March 2026, the first annual rise since December 2023. Chemical and steel manufacturers across Europe have imposed surcharges of up to 30% to offset surging electricity and feedstock costs. Germany's €1.6 billion package will be spent and gone in 60 days. France's €10 billion annual plan builds infrastructure that operates for decades. By the time Germany's fuel tax cut expires, France will have installed tens of thousands more heat pumps that permanently reduce French gas demand. This is the choice every European government is now being forced to make. Spend money managing dependency or spend money eliminating it. France chose elimination. Germany chose management. The long-run economics of those two decisions are not even close. Here is the piece of France's position that makes it structurally different from every other country attempting the same transition. And the mainstream energy coverage is consistently underweighting it. France is the world's largest net exporter of electricity. Right now today, the country earns over €5 billion per year selling power to neighboring countries. German factories. Belgian households. Swiss grids. French electrons moving outward every single day. And the price French industry pays for that electricity. €69 per megawatt hour. Compare that to the United Kingdom at €168 per megawatt hour. That gap is not temporary and it is not a policy artifact. It is the compounded result of a decision France made in 1974. After the first oil shock, France looked at its near-total lack of domestic fossil fuel resources and made a choice most governments did not have the political will to make. It built 57 nuclear reactors. A fleet producing over 370 terawatt-hours per year. More power than the country consumes. And in 2026, France is expanding that fleet. The government committed to supporting construction of 6 new EPR2 reactors at 3 sites, Penly, Gravelines, and Bugey. Estimated construction cost, €72.8 billion. State loans cover at least 60% of that at preferential rates. The reactors operate under 40-year contracts for difference with a price floor of €78 per megawatt hour and a ceiling of €110 per megawatt hour. That ceiling is the critical mechanism here. When the Strait of Hormuz closes, when Qatari LNG production is disrupted, when global commodity prices spike, French electricity prices do not spike with them. They stay capped by regulation regardless of what is happening in the Persian Gulf. France's industrial competitiveness advantage does not erode when the next external energy crisis hits. It holds. Every time. And that calculus, compounded over decades, determines where manufacturers locate production across the continent. Wind and solar already generated more EU electricity than fossil fuels for the first time in 2025. France's nuclear base plus its new renewables targets give it the most stable and lowest-cost large-scale electricity position in continental Europe. That is the foundation the €10 billion electrification plan is building on top of. Now watch what happens when we line up France's move with what the European Commission announced this week, because the continental coordination is accelerating in real time. This morning, Statistics Norway published data showing that Norway's crude oil exports jumped 68% in March year-on-year to 57.4 billion kroner. That is $6.1 billion in a single month. Norway is the biggest energy winner of this crisis. But here's the part that matters for this story. Norway's windfall is Europe's cost. Every extra billion Norway earns from elevated oil and gas prices is a billion more that European households, businesses, and governments are paying. And EU Energy Commissioner Dan Jorgensen made this precise calculation at the end of March. He stated that 30 days of the Iran conflict added $16.2 billion, or 14 billion euros, to the EU's fossil fuel import bill. He also said, and this is the line worth writing down, that oil and gas prices would not return to pre-war levels soon even if the conflict ended today. The Gulf facility strikes are expected to have a multi-year impact on gas supply. That is an official European Energy Commissioner telling you that this crisis is not temporary. Which is exactly why the April 22nd package matters so much. 7 days from now, the European Commission presents its emergency energy measures. The details are already known through Bloomberg and multiple Brussels sources. The package includes lower energy taxes and reduced grid charges, coordinated gas storage filling across member states, coordinated oil stock releases, more flexible state aid rules, and before this summer, a full EU electrification strategy with a new electrification objective built in. Von der Leyen said directly, "We need to scale up homegrown, affordable, reliable energy." The EU's own 2026 work program is titled Europe's Independence Moment. Italy's Prime Minister has publicly said she is prepared to raise taxes on companies speculating on energy prices through the current crisis. This is not one country moving. This is the entire continent coordinating simultaneously. Here is the mechanism underneath all of this, and this is where the structural argument becomes undeniable. France currently spends 180 million euros per day on fossil fuel consumption. Not per year. Per day. That adds up to more than 65 billion euros annually flowing out of the French economy to external energy suppliers. France has almost no domestic fossil fuel resources of its own. Nearly all of that 65 billion euros leaves the country. Every single year. Now look at where the European Union as a whole stands. Energy think tank Ember published analysis showing that fossil imports still account for 58% of the EU's total energy needs. For comparison, that figure is 24% for China and 37% for India. Europe is more fossil fuel import dependent than its two biggest economic competitors by a wide margin. And the 2021 to 2024 energy crisis made this extraordinarily expensive. Ember calculated that the EU paid an extra 930 billion euros for fossil fuel imports during those 4 years. 930 billion. That is 930 billion euros that did not build European infrastructure, fund European research, or pay European wages. It went to external energy suppliers. After Russia was cut off, Europe needed LNG. The United States filled the gap aggressively. By 2025, the US supplied 58% of all EU LNG imports, up from just 5% in 2021. And here is the concentration risk that Ember explicitly flagged. The top 4 gas providers now control 81% of EU imports. That kind of concentration invites manipulation by external suppliers under pressure. The Institute for Sustainable Development and International Relations calculated that if gas prices hold at elevated levels, the EU pays an extra 25 billion euros for US LNG in 2026 alone. Not total LNG costs. Extra costs. On top of baseline. From a supply disruption no European government controls. Ember projects that achieving the EU's electrification targets could have fossil fuel import dependency from 58% to around 30% by 2040. France's 10 billion euro plan is the national version of the calculation. Every heat pump installed permanently removes a gas boiler from the demand side. Every EV on the road removes a petrol-dependent vehicle. The dependency shrinks structurally, not temporarily. Let us talk about the numbers that reveal where the European grid actually stands today, because the baseline is more significant than most coverage suggests. In 2024, 47.5% of all EU electricity already came from renewables. Nearly half. Austria is at 90.1% renewable electricity. Sweden at 88.1%. Denmark at 79.7%. Wind and solar overtook fossil fuels in EU power generation for the first time in 2025. But here is the critical gap. Electricity's share of EU final energy consumption is still stuck at roughly 23%. The EU's 2030 target is 32%. The 2040 target is 50%. That gap between 23% today and 32% in 4 years is enormous, and it is where the real challenge lives. Most of the clean electricity progress so far has been in the power sector itself. The harder problem is everywhere else. Transport, heating, and industry still burn fossil fuels, accounting for around 82% of all fossil fuel use. Electrifying those sectors is the task France's €10 billion plan is directly attacking. France's own PPE3 energy roadmap targets 650 to 693 terawatt-hours of carbon-free power by 2035, against projected demand of 618 terawatt-hours. France will produce more clean electricity than it consumes. The surplus goes to neighboring grids. The electricity export revenue grows beyond €5 billion per year. Solar capacity targets 48 gigawatts by 2030. Onshore wind at 31 gigawatts by 2030. The EPR2 reactors at baseload capacity in the 2030s. The supply side is being built. The €10 billion plan is building the demand side to meet it. There is also a security dimension that goes beyond price. Reported Russian cyber attacks on European energy infrastructure surged 400% last year. The EU Commission is also planning new rules requiring electricity suppliers to be switchable within 24 hours by the end of 2026. A grid that runs on domestic nuclear and renewable sources is a grid that cannot be shut off by a foreign government's sanctions, blockade, or cyber attack. France's grid operator RTE did flag a structural overcapacity issue lasting until 2027 or 2028. More supply than current demand. But that is precisely why the heat pump and EV targets matter as demand creation, not just energy transition policy. The supply side and demand side of this strategy depend on each other. Here is my read on where all of this goes from here. In 7 days, April 22nd, the EU emergency package lands. Lower energy taxes on electricity. Reduced grid charges. Coordinated gas storage buying. Flexible state aid. And the foundation of a continental electrification strategy. These measures do not replace France's national plan. They scale it to the continent. By the end of 2026, the gas boiler ban in French new construction is operational. The first wave of 1 million heat pump installations begins. Germany is managing its energy pain with temporary subsidies while France is eliminating the source of the pain permanently. By 2028, French heat pump installation approaches 1 million per year. EPR2 reactor construction financing is locked in. French industrial electricity remains structurally below UK, German, and Italian competitors. Manufacturers making decade-long location decisions are pricing that advantage in. By 2030, France crosses the 60% fossil-free threshold in final energy consumption. Annual electrification spending hits €10 billion. The structural demand for imported LNG, American or otherwise, is measurably and permanently lower than any pre-2026 projection assumed. For American LNG producers who spent 4 years watching European import infrastructure expand and pricing in decades of contractual revenues, this is the data point that changes the model. France's plan is the blueprint. The EU's April 22nd package is the continental scaling of that blueprint. Every European economy looking at the same math, €22 billion in extra costs already paid since February, has the identical structural incentive. And Ember's projection makes this precise. Achieve the electrification targets and European fossil import dependency falls from 58% to around 30% by 2040. The €930 billion the EU lost during the 2021 to 2024 energy crisis is the political mandate that makes this transition unstoppable. Watch the video on your screen right now about how Europe is building payment infrastructure that completely bypasses American card networks. Because the energy shift, the payment shift, the software shift, and the defense procurement shift are not separate developments. They are the same continental calculation running across every sector at once. When payment rails, software infrastructure, defense procurement, and now energy supply are all being rebuilt to run without external dependencies, you are not watching isolated policy. You are watching a continent rewriting the terms of how it participates in the global economy. Thank you for watching. Subscribe and we will see you in the next one.